A pine cone is a great subject to draw, has a wonderful three-dimensionality about it, and it's one of those objects that's both simple and challenging all at the same time. But I think the important thing is to observe carefully exactly what we're trying to draw, to understand the form, to understand how it fits together so that all of our parts fit together. And that's the first thing I always do when I look at something such as this. What we basically have is an outside part that has the roughly triangular or wedge-shaped end that would have been visible when the cone was still closed up. And then we have the support going back to the central core of the cone. So all of these wedge-shaped end points that at one point held the seed tightly in the cone all go back to this central spot. And it's these wedge shapes that were always visible on the pine cone, which are the most obviously visible part of the cone. So my plan is to focus on positioning these in relationship to each other, to draw these most of the time first, and then when I've positioned these correctly, then to draw these arms so they go back in some credible way to this central branching structure. Like this. So understanding this structure is really important before we start to draw. And if we draw these ends in place first, then we both can make sure that they're all in the right place in relation to each other. And then we can make sure that their arms do in fact go back to our central branching point. So I think working out this strategy before we start is very helpful with this scene. The other thing we need to consider, of course, is our hatching. Part of the effect of this object is the shadows in contrast to the areas catching light. So because I'm drawing with pen, I will need to hatch and cross-hatch these darker areas. And again, it's helpful just to experiment with how I'm going to do that. I often talk about the value of spending a few minutes just sorting out a few of the marks we're going to use. And I found that for this drawing, I actually spent a lot longer than I usually do, partly because I was enjoying it and partly because I was just wanting to check a few things. This was my roughing out of the marks, and you can see how I'm starting to put together some of these more conceptual plans, but using the actual proportions of our subject. But this gave me a chance just to play around with some of the directions I was planning to use for the hatching and the cross-hatching. But you can now watch my complete drawing. I start with this triangular wedge shape that's probably the closest one to us. And now I need to position the other wedges, if you like, the other little triangles around it. But I also need to bear in mind that they're all not facing me straight on, even though they are all roughly a wedge triangular shape, fairly similar to each other. As well as being different sizes, the ones that are angled away from me are going to appear to be narrower. The ones that are tilting upwards and backwards are going to be a different shape. And when they get closer to the top, they start to become a little more diamond shaped, simply because of the way the cone has developed. And these are the small observations we want to make, because we want to get that individuality of each one, both because of where it is on the cone and also how we're observing it, what the perspective is as they tilt in different directions, towards us, away from us, and above us. But there is a pattern to this, and so identifying the pattern as we draw is helpful. So I'm doing what I said I was going to do. I start basically with the triangular wedges. I try and capture something of the angle as well as the individuality. And then I do the arm branching back, arching back from that wedge, and do my best to make it look like it's attaching to a core, to a central frame. But it's far easier to do it this way. If I were to do the arms first coming out of the center, I find that it's much less accurate, that my wedges are going to end up all over the place, or I'm going to have lines just going nowhere because I've drawn them too long. So knowing the order in which to draw things is incredibly important, and sometimes we just work it out by trial and error. Now that right hand upper wedge shape is actually too large, and at the very end you'll see me just do a few things while I'm doing the hatching to try and reduce the size of it in some way, make it look not quite as large. And so having come down the left hand side and down around underneath, I'm working at the right hand side, which is possibly a little more complex because we're seeing more parallel to some of the arms reaching across, and that just requires a little more accuracy, I think. But of course, I'm not trying to be too precise. I'm not trying to do a photographic record of this particular cone. I'm trying to do an interesting drawing of a pine cone, a very open pine cone. So I don't need it to be exact, but I do want it to be credible. It needs to look like it could look like this. And that does give me a sense of freedom, but I find that I do still try and keep it as accurate as I can, because that develops my observation and my drawing skills. But it does take a lot of the pressure off me. It's not like doing a portrait where it really has to be correct in almost every way. And now I get to the very top part, where it changes shape a little bit and branches out into three, like a little tripod at the top there. We picked these cones up under some enormous trees. I don't know, it must have been almost 20 years ago, and they've just been sitting around the house in various spots, sometimes outside on a table outside, ever since. They've survived remarkably well. So once I've got these all in place, I'll pay more attention to the hatching. Now, I've been doing hatching already because it's a great way to just keep in mind what's what. It's easy with so many lines to lose track of what line's what. Is this an outer edge? Is it a middle line? Is it a lower edge? Is this the gap or is it the arm? By putting at least some hatching lines in sooner rather than later, we just help to maintain in our head what's where. But now the time has come to try and create some overall values that reflect the values of our reference. So particularly in this central core area, I need to get it looking darker. Now, of course, if you want to have a go drawing this pine cone yourself, I will post this reference photo on my channel community page. Look, I think in lots of ways it's a great subject. We need to reference it carefully to have it look realistic, but equally, minor mistakes all over the place won't be noticeable at all. And it is a very good hatching challenge because the surfaces all change direction all over the place. So it's a good way to experiment with the direction of our hatching lines. Can I suggest you don't follow my hatching meticulously, but just watch my video and then have a go yourself? Because it's only by having to work out the directions yourself that you'll learn how to work out the directions. And that's always going to be a trial and error process. So get the general idea from my demo, but then when you do what makes sense to you at the time. And then you can always compare it to mine and see the different choices and work out which one you prefer. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have a go drawing it and you have fun. It's kind of a fun topic. But whatever you draw and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'm just about finished this, but I really did have fun with this. I've been meaning to draw it for a long time, and well, today just seemed to be the day. So I'm just doing these little final touches. I just made that wedge a little bit smaller, as I said, darkening some of the areas around the central core, a little bit of shadow down the very bottom. And then, for better or worse, my pine cone is done, and I finally got around to drawing it. All the best. See you next time.